When 9/11 happened in September of 2001, Jonathan J. Hopkins was a brand new graduate from the United States Military Academy at West Point. Out of a class of 933 that spring at West Point, Mr. Hopkins was fourth overall, fourth out of 933. Over the next several years, Jonathan Hopkins would rise to the rank of captain and serve 3 combat deployments in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Yesterday, now former U.S. Army Captain Jonathan J. Hopkins was fired because regardless of all that I just said about him, our country now officially rejects his service and wants him out of the military because of don't ask, don't tell. Were there negative incidents, negative reaction of any kind amongst your fellow soldiers once that process started?
Really, no. We worked in a element of mutual respect, which is exactly as it existed before I was outed about 14 months ago. I've talked to people that used to be in my infantry company, some of whom may have assumed that I was gay beforehand because there's not too many unmarried captains and commanders in the Army. And even them, they assumed that when I was in the unit that maybe he's gay, but he's a good commander is exactly what they've said. And so that didn't really matter because what mattered is he took care of us. He trained us for combat. He worked well with all of us. My battalion commander brought me in. It was the same day that it was announced that I was on promotion to major a year early, which only a small minority of the Army receives. At the same time, he said, but also you're under investigation for being gay. It really kind of exemplifies the paradox here that some of the people the Army judges to be among the best also might be taken out by this policy that isn't based on your performance, but instead on how you were born. So when he informed me of that, I talked to my chaplain for a couple hours just to make sure I was making the right choice, and I walked back into his office and I told him what the truth was, because I came to the conclusion that I'd lived a government-mandated lie to cover up who I was, to actually have to fib a bit so that I wasn't ever telling anybody that I was gay. And that lie really just had to come to an end. It was time to just be honest. That's what we're dedicated to from the time we entered West Point all through our military career. Duty, honor, country, or the Army values of honor, integrity, they matter. And I thought that applied here. It's really just kind of like a survivor mentality to a point. I mean, you're focused mostly on your job, but this is a constant, severe distraction. It causes you to be paranoid, etc. During that time, you're just hoping you can make it to a situation that nobody's going to find a reason to want to out you, or somebody might not find out accidentally, and that you can just make it until the policy changes, which everybody seems to assume is going to happen in the next year or two. I love the Army. I've always loved the Army, or else I wouldn't have spent 9 years depriving myself of the ability to have happy personal relationships with others and a reasonably successful personal life, and just focused professionally. Because I loved what I was doing, I thought the people I did that work with were incredible.
Katie Miller is at West Point. She's due to graduate in the spring of 2012. She is a graduate of U.S. Army Airborne School already. Her grade point average is 3.829 out of 4.0. The subjective judgment of cadet supervisors of her military performance is graded even higher than that. It is over 3.9. She is ranked 9th overall in her class of more than 1,100 West Point cadets. But she will not be graduating from West Point. She is transferring out. She's leaving for Yale because she says the don't ask, don't tell policy means that her integrity has been compromised, which means she is unable to live up to Army values.
Before high school, I was very much in the closet. I hadn't come to terms with myself until high school. But around that same time, I knew that I really wanted to go to West Point, and I really wanted to serve my country. And I was able to put a personal aspect of my identity in the backseat, and that being my sexuality, so I could fulfill these wishes. But being recloseted has been a much bigger challenge than I ever anticipated. It's taken a much bigger toll socially, mentally, emotionally than I could have imagined. And I completely underestimated this when I decided to enter into the military.
If the policy were repealed, either anytime soon or in the next few years, would you consider rejoining the Army?
Absolutely. I'm actually really committed to military service, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And should Don't Ask, Don't Tell be repealed soon, I would definitely reconsider returning to West Point.
Unless drastic action is taken, Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fehrenbach is in his last day or two of his decorated 19-year military career. But like he has told us multiple times on this show, he is fighting back. This time with a legal case to try to block the Air Force from firing him, and by applying the new standards. Those reflect the new restrictive interpretation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell implemented by Secretary Gates, and you believe that interpretation of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell rule should have excluded you from being fired in this case.
Absolutely, Rachel. And when the Secretary announced these new standards in March, he said that they did apply to open cases, and my case is still open to this date. And each one of those factors that he announced applies to my case. And if they don't apply them to my case, then, Rachel, they don't apply to any case.
I mean, Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been in place for 17 years. Its expected repeal is coming through the policy process, not through the courts. What is it that makes you think Colonel Fehrenbach has a shot at stopping this policy legally?
Well, Rachel, part of it has to do with the man's extraordinary record. The man's a war hero. He's been recognized by the Air Force as a war hero. And his service record is so extraordinary that the Air Force has zero evidence in the record that would warrant discharging him under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The Witt case that Lieutenant Colonel Fehrenbach just referred to was decided in 2008 by the Ninth Circuit. Prior to the Witt case, the burden was on the service member to show that his remaining in the Air Force was not a detriment to morale, good order, and cohesion of the unit. Now, after Witt, the burden is on the Air Force to come forward with evidence and to meet its heavy burden of proof to show that retaining him would, in fact, harm morale, would actually harm the unit. And the evidence in the record is quite clear that retaining him is great for the unit, it's great for the Air Force. His 2010 officer performance report from February 2010 specifically said that he, quote, raised morale. And when you apply the Witt standard, and against that record, it is clear that he should not be discharged under this policy.
So I hope that if we're successful in this injunction, we don't just help my career where I'm able to deploy again and to serve 20 or more years, because that's all I wanted to do these last 23 years is to serve my country. We hope this helps other pending cases and other cases that fall under these new enforcement standards. We hope to help everyone out there that is going through this process right now.
Victor, nobody right now nobody will argue with the sort of outlook that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is on its way toward being repealed. We know what that process would look like in Washington. We understand that process is essentially rolling toward completion. Certainly other things could happen, but everybody believes the policy is on its way toward being repealed. The president personally looked you in the eye and told you that this would get done. Do you think it's conceivable, from your experience in the Air Force, your experience in the military all this time, would it be impossible for the president to just stop implementation of the policy, to hold implementation of the policy until the repeal process can be completed? Couldn't he just do that?
He could use an executive order. He could also use stop-loss procedures. But what the Service Members Legal Defense Network and other organizations are promoting is that we do need the change to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This law was enacted by Congress, and the only way to get permanent change and a permanent solution is for Congress to repeal this law. But that doesn't mean that we don't need presidential leadership and courage here. We definitely need the president to step forward and to lead this fight to end this discrimination, this unconstitutional law.